Hi guys, welcome to round 1 of Flush's random Steam tournament, number 2. I'm Kupo Trooper, or you Spoony Bard on the forums, and I won Flush's last random tournament, mostly by fluke, admittedly. Anyway, this is my first game versus my first opponent, whose name I assume means 4-0. I'm playing Obedient Dead, and he's playing Izet. This will be the only match I'll record looking back. I want to do most of my commentary live, but I wasn't quite set up at this point. Right, so the idea behind a random tourney is that we get our 3 decks chosen for us. So I had Obedient Dead, Sepulchral Strength, and Azorius, whereas my opponent had Izet, Goblins, and Garruk. I'm not gonna lie, my pool is more powerful than his. Just a bit. But that's the nature of randomness, you know? So, let's get this thing started. Okay, so, my starting hand couldn't really be better. I suppose it could have some removal, that would have been nice. And at this point I was expecting to be against Goblins, because let's face it, most people would start out strongly with Goblins. And Obedient Dead is kind of my destroyer of Goblins. Okay, so pretty self-explanatory hand. 4 lands, great. Liliana Spectre and Vampire Nighthawk, wonderful. And of course, one of the best cards in the game, Massacre Worm. Can't ask much better. Now at this point I was like, Gah? Izet? My god, he's not playing Goblins, and I was actually quite dismayed by this, because my hand was pretty good against Goblins, i.e. Massacre Worm being an insta-win. And the problem with Izet is it doesn't rely on creatures, so a massive part of Obedient Dead is made redundant. Not useless, but redundant, because with the Izet deck, it's all about the damage race, if it's built properly, and I'm sure my opponent, being a good duelist, probably did build it properly. And so I've got to stop him doing damage directly to me by disrupting his game. Now that's interesting what he discarded there, because obviously since I'm doing commentary in hindsight, I know that if he hadn't discarded that, he probably would have won this duel. You'll find out later. Anyway, so he plays Compulsive Research, great card. Ugh, Fume Spitter. A blatant card that I put in this deck to combat things like Peacekeepers and Goblins. Really useless against Izet, but, you know, it's still 1-1. Now here, the logical play normally would be to play Liliana's Shade. It's a 4-drop, I have 4 mana, it helps me thin out my deck. But I was a bit worried that he had something like, is it Burst Lightning? And then he'd be able to wipe the floor with both my creatures. Oh, Arc Lightning, there you go, that's the one. And he did have it. So yeah, it sucks that he was able to kill my Nighthawk, which is a good card against that deck, what with life gain. But there you go, I'd rather sacrifice the Nighthawk and just have 1-for-1, rather than him be able to remove my Shade and my Spectre with 1 card. Bad card advantage, man. Bad. Anyway, so I kind of go against what I just said here by playing the Spectre, but the idea was that I left 1 mana open, so it would give it a bit of protection with its buffing effect. Notice I haven't played the Fume Spitter yet, not really much point. Especially because if I'd played it that turn and he had another Arc Lightning, he could kill all 3 of my creatures with 1 card. And on cue, the Arc Lightning! Great. Now here I just do a sort of, you know, professional move by buffing it up, and for nothing's like, it's 2 man. It's like, okay, better to be safe than sorry. No harm in that. So, up to the 6th land drop. You're probably wondering, playing Massacre Worm, but you don't get to use its effect. There are very, very few creatures in that deck that have 2 or less toughness. There are some good ones, some pingers, but he obviously hasn't drawn any, otherwise he would have played them by now. So I just figure I'm going to get Massacre Worm out there as a beat stick. It's quite unlikely he's going to be able to kill it, because the burns in that deck aren't that huge compared to Born of Flame, which is the mono red burn deck. So he just plays the little Ethernaut guys, whatever they're called, and passes. So I can start swinging in with my ugly worm. So I swing. He obviously doesn't block. Get nice 6 damage in there. This is why Massacre Worm is such a great card. It not only is its effect almost game-breaking against certain decks, aggro decks. I hate aggro decks. But even if you don't get to use his effect, he's still a 6/5 beat stick for 6. That's not great, but it's certainly enough to put the hurt in. Oh, Time Warp. And Reverberate. Buffing his guy up to 5 damage, and then being able to swing in twice the next 2 turns for God knows how much damage I had to chain Murder to that. I didn't really want to have to use Murder on the little Ethernaut guys, because they're not that great, but that would have done so much damage, and as I said earlier, Izzet is all about the damage race, is all about going straight for their life points and just racing your opponent, and since Obedient Dead, the deck I'm using, is really fairly slow, it's not the slowest deck, but it's one of the slowest, I just had to stop his damage at any cost. Yeah, fairly typical. That's 3 Arc Lightnings this duel. I believe that's every Arc Lightning in his deck. Treacherous worm! How dare you turn against me! See, my opponent, for nothing, he understands what Izzet is about. You can tell he's played the deck before. It's all about getting that damage in. The closer he puts me to 0 life, the more likely he's going to top deck something that can nuke me to death. And no matter how much removal I have, this top deck, Dominus of Fealty, that was such an amazing top deck for him to get. Now he can just turn my worm against me every turn, doing 10 damage. Nantuku Shade, not too bad. If you got Murder, it's GG. If only, man. If only. So yeah, swing in with the worm. He's obviously not going to block. Next turn I know that he's going to take my worm and he's going to try and swing in for 10. I'm on 12, not too bad, and I put that extra swamp down. Usually I'd want to keep that swamp in my hand to make him think that I've got some kind of trick. But in this case, since I've got a pumper, a fire breather guy, obviously having more lands is better, and it actually allows me to block his Massacre Worm, or my Massacre Worm I should say. Grr. Electrolyze, another nice top deck. Bit harsh really, but it happens, it happens. Now, interesting that he didn't target my guy. I'm assuming it's so I have to block the worm, because otherwise I could have been left with 1 health. Right? So I block the worm, I buff my guy up. First of all, I just do it in 3 in case he's got an instant. He doesn't. Surely you can't get that lucky with top decks. So buff him up, my guy survives, the worm dies. Sucks to have to destroy my own worm, but Breaking Point gives each player an option to spend 6 life to stop its effect. Otherwise it wipes the field of monsters. Obviously, cunningly enough, For Nothing has taken me down to 6, so obviously I have no choice. And I draw the Murder. Where were you earlier when I needed you? Where were you? Anyway, useless, and as I was saying earlier, the insane amount of removal in this deck is almost negated against Izzet, especially at this point now I'm down to 6 health. Now at this point I'm starting to get a little bit worried, because I'm in a pretty unhealthy state. He is too, but his deck is way more equipped to deal that quick damage that's needed at the end game than mine, which is a control deck. Of course, my deck has loads of bombs, but I'm obviously not drawing them. Another removal, a land, and a removal when he has nothing on the field. At this point I'm just lucky that he doesn't draw anything nasty. Then again, the Izzet deck, whatever it's called, Mindstorms is it, something like that, it doesn't have that much big burn, which is now where I can come back and say if he hadn't discarded that big burn card earlier on turn 3, he would actually be able to finish me off right now. Now I know what ifs are pretty useless, but it could have happened. And here comes my bomb, as I was just talking about. Grave Titan. Absolutely insane card, and amazing against that deck. Now interestingly enough, my opponent here is saying it didn't let him pause. So apparently he had 2 mana leaks. So obviously I had enough mana to stop one of the mana leaks, which is a counter. Your opponent has to pay 3 to stop the card being countered, but apparently he had 2. So if it weren't for lag or whatever was causing him to be unable to pause the game, he could have stopped my Grave Titan. He would have had to have spent 2 cards to do it, but that could have meant the difference between him winning and losing. So I asked him if he wants a rematch, but like a true sportsman, he declines that. I'm not surprised, but I would have given him one if he wanted one, because I understand completely how that is. Again, in so many online duels that's happened to me. Blue is my favourite colour, and I usually play Crosswinds. It's my most played deck. And it happens loads, and it's just one of those things. So, sorry for nothing, but GG. GG.